Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Hope you're all well today. You are all muted upon entering because we are just trying to keep things quiet. So just letting everybody know who speaks English, that if you choose English as the language you'd like to listen to, please choose English. You go down to the bottom, click on interpretations, and choose English as your language. Even though you can hear me and you haven't chosen a language, you still need to choose a language because at a certain point, someone will be speaking in Spanish and you will need to hear our interpreter on the English channel interpreting for you. So in just a moment, we're still letting a lot of people in, so it will start in a moment with everybody. Hi, everybody. As you're coming in, welcome, welcome. Those of you up in the Sacramento area, I hear it's very, very warm. So, all right. So when you have a moment, Lorna, would you mind please explaining in Spanish how to choose your language? All right. So welcome, everyone. Good to see you all. You've all been muted. Be sure to choose a language. The reason we will allow you to speak, but the reason we keep everybody muted is because we are having simultaneous Spanish interpretation. And when people are unmuting their own lines, we sometimes hear background noise, sometimes people are talking, and it makes it very hard for Lorna to do her amazing job interpreting. So once again, if you are an English speaker, please go down to the bottom of your screen, choose English. Under interpretation, choose English. You can choose Spanish if that is your language of choice. So welcome, everybody. There's a lot of people here who I've not met before, so thank you so much for joining us. My name is Judy Mark. I am the president of Disability Voices United, which is an organization directed by and for people with developmental disabilities and their family members. We are almost celebrating our 4th anniversary of being in existence, and we feel we're making a lot of progress as a 4-year-old organization. We are based all around the state. We are a statewide California organization that works across developmental disabilities and also works with people with other disabilities as well on a range of issues. You will see Ed Herzl, who is managing, she's our Zoom master, our master of Zoom, I like to call her. She is going to be posting stuff in the chat for you all to know what to do. You will have a chance to ask questions by using the raise hand feature by going to the bottom of your screen, clicking on reaction and choosing raise hand. You see there's a hand up next to me. And then I will lower your hand when you're done, or you can lower it on your own. You can also have lots of other features. If you like what somebody says, you can clap, or you can put a thumbs up, or you can have a heart, or you can laugh, or you can have a party. All these things you can do. They added lots of fun features here on Zoom. So we have SDP Connect every other week. Generally, we've decided to go every single week through early July when the program rolls out statewide, because we've been getting a lot of interest in our SDP Connect and a lot of people are excited about moving into the program. So we try to answer your questions as much as we can. We only go an hour and a half. We know that we can't get to every single question by 6 o'clock, but our interpreter needs to leave at around 6 or 6:05 every day, every time. And we are committed to always having Spanish interpretation. So please make sure that you please don't be upset if I don't get to everybody's questions today or your comments, because we promise we'll be back, same place, same channel next week, okay? And we will get to your questions. We promise we'll do it. You should know that we've been doing these STP Connects since last August, and you can find the recordings of all of our STP Connects on our interchange. So we have something called the Self-Determination Interchange, which gives you all an opportunity to get to know each other and learn together. You go to theinterchange.org, and we have another one on communication access as well. We will be developing one on supported decision making. Also our general website at disabilityvoicesunited.org is available for lots of other information on all the work that we do throughout the state. So each week we usually have a different theme. We've had the same theme for the past 3 weeks because it's ever changing and very important and exciting. So I'm going to be giving an update to you all about where the state of California's budget is in relationship to the self-determination program. So I'll start with what that means, since some of you maybe haven't been at our last 2 STP Connects. So the state of California passes a budget every year. It will be finalized by June 15th, and the governor has to sign it before the end of the month. The budget obviously funds everything in the state of California. It funds a whole lot of money for prisons, which is not the greatest thing, but it does. It funds a whole lot of money for much better things like healthcare and education and developmental services for people with developmental disabilities. So there is a department in Sacramento called DDS, or Department of Developmental Services, and they are in charge of contracting with the 21 regional centers around the state and funding the services that many of us receive. And those services are obviously in the self-determination program being offered in a different way, where we have much more choice and control over our lives. I should just tell you personally, I have a son who's 24 years old, who's served by a regional center and is in the self-determination program. I'm very excited. He just started on yesterday, his 2nd year in the program, because he started June 1st of 2020. And he's only been in the program for the whole time it's been COVID. So there are a lot of things we wanted to do that we didn't get to do, but we're really hopeful we'll be able to do that in the 2nd year. The way that the budget works is that the Governor Newsom, puts out what he thinks is the budget, what he believes should be the budget, and then the legislature says, well, wait a second, we get a take at it as well. And so what they do is they kind of give a counteroffer. They say, yeah, we like this. Some of this we don't like, and some of this we're going to change. Historically, so everybody's Democratic in the state. It's a Democratic governor, a Democratic assembly, and a Democratic Senate. So they agree on a lot of things. But usually the legislature likes to give more money to things than the governor is willing to do. So the governor usually holds back on things. In the governor's budget, though, he designated $10.2 million to help implement the self-determination program. And what that money goes to is most of it, almost 80% of it, will go to regional centers for them to hire what DDS is calling, remember, this is not law yet, but this is what the governor's proposed. The regional centers would be able to hire what's called, participant choice specialists. I had to remember what they were calling, because the word self-determination is nowhere in there. But participant choice specialists will be in charge of moving people into the program more quickly, helping people, supporting people in the self-determination program and others who are in the traditional system, but who use participant-directed services. There will be 60 new staff hired around the state at regional centers. So we at Disability Voices United have been concerned that those new positions will be hired with no accountability to ensure that they are actually helping people move in instead of creating new barriers. We believe there's been a lot of barriers to participation in the first 3 years. For those of you who don't know this, self-determination has actually been around for almost 25 years. It was a pilot of 200 people throughout the state. I see Cindy Cox on here, who was part of the pilot. At Kern Regional Center, it was 5 regional centers, very small pilot, very successful. Then in 2018, the program went statewide through what's called a phase-in period of up to 2,500 people who were randomly selected around the state based on diversity factors. The problem is there have been so many barriers to people moving into the program that only about a little less than 600 people have moved into the program in 3 years. It's an absolute, to me, travesty. But we have spent a lot of our time focusing in on the barriers that exist in the program and trying to reduce those barriers and eliminate those barriers. That's why we want to make sure that these participant choice specialists don't add to the barriers. So I wanted to give you a couple of updates on things that have just happened today, just in the last day. Is that the legislature not only said, okay, we're going to give the $10.2 million to implement the self-determination program, but they're actually designating an additional $1 million to create what's called the Office of the Ombudsperson for the self-determination program. Now, the ombudsperson, that's a term, ombudsman, that some of you have maybe never heard that term. It's a real government term. It's a person in an office that exists to break down barriers to whatever kinds of government services people may need. So right now there are ombudspersons for the long-term care system, for aging, for nursing homes, for child support, for foster care. In all these different sort of social service agencies, they have an ombudsperson. There is currently no ombudsperson at all at DDS. This will be the first attempt at an ombudsperson entering the DD system. It will be specifically for the self-determination program. And we believe that it's very exciting that we'll be able to move forward on that. So $1 million will probably pay for an office about 8 or 9 people, which is a great number of people that if you have problems entering the self-determination program or staying in it, you should be able to call this independent office. They are not beholden to DDS. While they are located in DDS, the DDS is not allowed to provide any oversight of the work that they do. They are supposed to be completely independent. And while they're not here necessarily to answer everybody's questions and to solve everybody's individual problems, what they are here to do, what they would be here to do is to look at trends, look to say, wow, a lot of people are having problems getting their spending plan attached to their IPP so that they can move into the program. And that's a problem. So maybe they would recommend to the Department of Developmental Services that they need to issue some more guidance and direction to regional centers to ensure or to provide some more oversight. So they will have an 800 number. The number will be listed on it, will be required to be listed. I know I'm talking really fast, Lorna. I'm going to slow down. The number will be required to be listed on every regional center's website and on the DDS website, so that if anybody here has any problems, you can just immediately call and get and make your concerns heard. They will not show up to your IPPs. They will not show up to fair hearings. But what more importantly they'll do is try to change the whole self-determination program for the better. So I wanted to let you know that exciting news. The other piece of exciting, there's many other pieces of exciting news related to the self-determination program. One of them is that the legislature has put in, they've done this many times, a restoration of social and recreational programs in camp. So for those of you who have little kids, you don't even remember that back before 2009, we got to send our kids to camp, and the regional centers, well, I never like to say the regional center pays for it because it's not the regional center's money, it's our money. Remember, regional centers are using taxpayer dollars just to fund all of our services. So taxpayer dollars are paying for camp and social rec programs, which is super exciting. And so we've gotten this close before, and the governor has, in the negotiations over the budget, removed it. We are hopeful this time that you should know the state is rolling in money, just has tons and tons of dough right now. So this is the year that we really think we're going to be able to restore it, which is super exciting for us. The reason that this relates to the self-determination program is under the self-determination program, you already have access. Ed is saying that I sound echoey. Do I sound echoey to everyone? I'm looking at Talene and Cindy. I'm so tired of this. My computer, hold on. I'm just going to try to fix that, okay? Is this any better, everybody? Testing 1, 2, 3, testing 1, 2, 3.
Sounds the same to me, Judy, but I might not be the best to judge.
But Lorna said, all right, well, Fernando's saying thumbs up. So let's just, okay. People are saying they can understand it. All right. I will try to speak slowly, which is a very big problem for me. I speak very fast because I have parents from New York. So, so the reason why restoring social recreational programs is really important. I see Sorrel Markowitz. Hi, Lovey. How are you? It's so fun to see my friends I haven't seen in a really long time, like show up on my little screen here. But the reason why social rec is so important is because right now in the self-determination program, we have access to social rec. However, we don't get additional funding to pay for it. It's got to be out of your original budget. We believe, and I think regional centers and many others agree with us, that one of the reasons why there is such significant racial and ethnic disparities that is because so many people of color have used social rec programs, and when they were taken away in 2009, that just made the disparities so much worse. And so we're very excited about social rec being restored for anybody who stayed in the traditional system. It's great for them, but it's also great for people in the self-determination program. You will have to go back to your regional center, make a case at your IPP for why you would want to access social rec programs, and then they will add whatever is approved, they will add that amount to the budget, which is great because that means if you're getting a swimming or if you're getting karate or whatever, you will be able to have some of that funded from fees in the traditional system. So that's very exciting. There's some other things in the budget that I just wanted to point out. In the legislative budget, which is, remember, different than the governor's budget, they funded a massive amount of money to raise the rates for service providers. An incredible amount of money, like about $1.4 billion. And I am not certain whether that will get agreed to by the governor. It may not, but if it does, or if any piece of that does, that has an implication for people in the self-determination program, because our budgets are based on current rates, not based on rates from when we went into the IPP or when we had our annual meeting. It's based on current rates. So if those rates go up on July 1st, all of our budgets are going to increase in that same amount. So let's say you had supported living services as part of your budget, and those rates go up by 10%, that portion of your budget would go up by 10%. So it's very exciting for people in the self-determination program, and obviously exciting for people in the traditional system as well. I think all the rest of the things that are in here are pretty much what I spoke about last week and the week before, just to remind you that there's additional funding. If you require a service provider who speaks a language other than English in the traditional system, that service provider would be able to get a higher rate if the budget passes, a higher rate, because they're offering you a bilingual service provider. That same additional rate would be able to go into your budget if that is something you require. All right. So for all you English speakers, that's not for you. Another piece that I wanted to mention was there's some staff training, which is very exciting. They're going to develop a training for direct support professionals. And if they go through this training program, they will receive higher pay. So I had asked the question, what if my son's staff goes through that training program? Would we then be able to add to his budget that additional amount of money so that I can give them an increase in salary? And the answer was yes, because you have to have what's in the traditional system. So that I really want my son to be in my son's staff to go through that training program. I think it would be very beneficial for that. So I'm going to end right here, because I think I gave you all the updates, and I'm going to, if any of you have a question that you want to ask on screen or by phone, you can use the raise hand feature by going down to reactions and clicking hand raise.
I have a couple from chat, Judy, while we're waiting.
Yes, perfect.
So from our friend Kim Sinclair, in the traditional system, would the social rec vendor need to be vendored?
Yes, because everything in the traditional system needs to be vendored. And it is actually a conversation that I'm having and writing an email about, a letter about right now. So for those of you who can remember before 2009, those old people like me, those social and rec programs were very segregated, primarily. They were, a swim program or a gymnastics program that targeted people with developmental disabilities. They were a theater program or a music program that had all people with developmental disabilities. That's not going to be possible anymore. With this new, let me go back. There is a rule that is coming down from the federal government that must go into effect in 2023 that requires all services to be fully integrated into the community. You cannot be in a segregated program just for people who receive regional center services. So that means that as social and rec programs roll out new again, every single new program that gets vendored must be fully integrated. So will they be the same programs before, but now are reopening in a way that is fully inclusive? Or will they also be, I'm assuming that's the case, but will they also be the local YMCA or the local Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts or the local gym who's running programs, and they say, we are willing to get oh my God, somebody just wrote vaccinated. We are willing to get vendored, not vaccinated, but vendored. And we are willing to go through that process so that we can get some of your clients to our gym, to our music program, and that we are open and welcoming. Ours is an inclusive program, and we're welcoming you. So obviously it's going to take for the traditional system a while to get up and running, to really nurture those community-based programs and to encourage them to become inclusive. It's going to take some time for that to happen, I think, and for those of you who don't understand the vendorship process at regional centers, you're very lucky, because it is kind of a nightmare. there's 21 regional centers and they vendor 21 different ways. And there's all these, you get vendored at one, maybe you get guest vendored at others. And it's a very complicated process that we have had to be involved in just to do our little conference last month. So anyway, I think it's going to take a while, but definitely you cannot be in a segregated program for sure.
Okay, thank you, Judy, because that answered another one of the questions that I had on the list. To reiterate for Tina, no, the social rec and self-determination cannot be segregated. It needs to be integrated. A question from Harriet: would the budget automatically increase by 10 to 30% if the service provider's rate went up by that much, or would you need to renegotiate your self-determination budget?
Nothing goes automatically up, people. We wish it were that simple. We wish it would happen that way, but it doesn't happen that way. You're going to have to go back and you're going to have to call an IPP. And the reason why it doesn't, I actually shouldn't criticize anybody. The reason why it doesn't go up is because for some people, they may not need that extra money. Remember, there's some people out there with very large, robust budgets who all their needs are being met right now with their current amount. So you would need to proactively say, we're putting this extra money in the, we would like to put this extra money in the budget from a social rec program. And this is the kind of program we would want. I am sure it's not going to happen instantaneously. I am sure the regional centers are going to sit and need direction from DDS, which they seem to need for every single thing. So, obviously, as always, we will be advocating on your behalf to make it happen faster.
Thank you, Judy. I have another question from Francis. I have a question about the budget. When we had the meeting with the service coordinator to discuss the budget, and they added 3 months of COVID, April, May, and June. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to make the transition to the SDP in June. SC has discounted the month of April and May from COVID. And when I make the transition in July, my budget will also change because in the month of June, I did not make the transition. So I will not have the 3 months of COVID that they had added in the beginning in the budget meeting. Is this correct?
So here's the thing. Unfortunately, it is mostly correct. The COVID hours are added on a month-by-month basis. It's horrific. And, but you should know that there is something like $250 million in the budget for this coming year for COVID services. Here's the thing, folks, is you have to make the case that the services are needed because of COVID. It's because of COVID. So I'll give you an example. Let's say your child is, so what was an easy one to do is when school was not in session in person, you could make the case that you needed extra help because you had a job, you had to tend to another child, that the child's not in school and somebody needs to be sitting with them at all times. School's not providing a one-on-one in the home, so you need to hire somebody to be in the home. Now that school's back in person, you can't really make that argument. But what you can say is, I've gotten a new job, or I am, my son or daughter has regressed. They're not sleeping. They're having more challenging behaviors because of COVID. They need, special attention, or I need a break. I'm exhausted. I've been home for a year. I need more respite because I am done. I am exhausted and I am done. I mean, these are the things you can say because of COVID, this happened. You can also say remember, COVID also means you got sick. You had health issues because of COVID. That is a COVID-related expense. So you can't just say, I want COVID hours. Some regional centers are literally giving everybody COVID hours. They give every single client an extra 30 hours a month. And now they're all pulling back those hours, even though there's still $250 million in the budget for it. So what you need to get ahead of the game, everybody, figure out whether you need it. Please do not ask for things that you do not need. You're not going to win, and then it becomes a problem. So ask for things that you need. If it's COVID related, ask for it directly because of COVID. If it's other things that you need because you have a change of circumstance, or because there's clearly unmet need that's never been, you've never been able to access certain services that the regional center either should have offered you or had offered you before. Those are the things you should be making arguments for. Don't just say, I deserve COVID hours. You have to be able to justify everything you ask for.
Thank you for that, Judy. I have a question.
Oh, wait, somebody just asked if the COVID hours are retroactive. I believe they are not. I believe they are not.
Thank you for that, Judy. I had another question up here. Here's a question we get versions of pretty frequently, and I think it's always good to respond to it when it comes up. Is there a list of persons? Oh, from John. Is there a list of persons who are certified for doing person-centered plans kept anywhere? Our regional center only has 4 names, all of whom we do not want to hire for developing a PCP for our son. Thank you.
Wow. Could you ask him to put in the chat which regional center it is? Because
John, please let us know what regional center it is, if you're comfortable.
So first of all, there is no list. There shouldn't be a list. If you had a list, you'd be in the traditional system and you'd have to pick from a list. So forget about the silly list. However, prior to this budget, this new budget that's coming out, you could hire anyone you want to be your independent facilitator, as long as they can show they've had some basic training in person-centered planning and the principles of self-determination. DDS or the governor has requested in the budget that independent facilitators be required to be certified. They have not defined what that means. I am concerned that they are going to make increased disparities and increase inequities by making that certification so difficult that we won't be able to find a Hmong speaking independent facilitator or Korean speaking independent facilitator in the Central Valley or something like that. We need to be able to easily get people to become certified as an independent facilitator so that we can increase the ability for diverse individuals to enter. So what is that certification going to look like? I am really hopeful, because I've had this conversation with DDS, that it will be a pretty modest process to become certified. So will there end up being a list of certified independent facilitators? Maybe. I would be sad if that existed, because I would never want you to think that that's your only group. One of my favorite stories I've heard is that somebody who was entering the self-determination program a couple of years ago really thought that their child's special ed teacher would be a phenomenal independent facilitator, but that person knew nothing about the self-determination program. So she knew that I was leading some independent facilitator trainings. So she signed up her son's teacher for the independent facilitator training. She learned about it and then became an independent facilitator for one person, just that one young man. She wasn't making a business about it, but she was able to get paid to assist this one family because she knew this young man really, really well. You want to hire an independent facilitator that you feel connected to, that you know. If you don't know anybody who can do it, then interview lots of people. In the orientation for the self-determination program, I actually wrote a piece of it that shows kind of interview questions that you can ask of independent facilitators. How many plans have you ever done? What can you show me a plan that you've done? You can take out the name of the person. There's a lot of good questions you can ask. You should know, I see that somebody put about the regional center paying the initial person-centered plan fee. Yes. So in the 3-year phase-in, people were able to access, before they entered the program, up to $2,500 to hire a person-centered planner to help do their planning, identify services and supports, create their spending plan, and advocate for them as they're moving into the program. That is in the budget. That remaining, so remember I said there's $10.2 million for the self-determination program. 7.8 million will go to regional centers to hire staff. 2.5 million will go, and more than that, that could be increased. 2.5 million will go towards the people's ability to be able to pay up to $2,500. Doesn't mean it should cost you $2,500 to hire a person-centered planner. God, no. I mean, I had the best person in the country do my son's person-centered plan, and she didn't cost anywhere close to that. So if somebody comes to you and says, I'm an independent facilitator, I will do your person-centered plan for $2,500, walk in the other direction, because that means they're just trying to get the money and they really don't have your best interest. I can't tell you what that exact dollar amount is for the person-centered plan, but you want to be able to save some of that $2,500 to use towards helping identify services and supports, creating your spending plan sometimes takes more time than doing your person-centered planning. And then you also want to maybe save some money in case you need them to come to your IPP and help you explain what your person-centered plan and your spending plan are to your service coordinator. So you want to make sure to save that money over time.
And Judy, I just have two questions that I'd like to get to. I know we do have two questions on the hand raised list. One is from Sue Gavin. So are adapted horseback riding and water polo a no for HRC funding, but could be a yes in a self-determination program budget? Is that?
So horseback riding is fine in the self-determination program and will likely be fine in the traditional system, because horseback riding is generally a one-on-one. So you should know that when we talk about integration, that means that you are not in a group of that everybody in your group either is receiving regional center services or is paid to be there with you. So that is a segregated setting. Even though that's not the way it's talked about, that's the easiest way to explain it. If you are doing a one-on-one with somebody, you're not in a group, so it doesn't matter. So therapeutic horseback riding will definitely be back on the table. What wouldn't, and if you're doing, let's say you're doing an individual one-on-one swim class, also fine. But would not be on the table is a group swim class, a swim team where everybody's a regional center client, a group gymnastics class. Those things, or a theater program or a music program where everybody is either a regional center client or a paid person to be with you. So those things would not be. What was the second example? Water polo. Well, it depends. If everybody else on the water polo team is a person who's received services from a regional center, then no, it would not be eligible. But if it's an integrated water polo team, for sure, yes.
Thank you for that, Judy. And pursuant to Hcbs final rules, another question about that I have from Spencer is, so all the events, etc., run by agencies that were specifically putting on things for adults with developmental disabilities prior to March 2020 aren't coming back in that form. Instead, we're going to have our hours covered, just have our hours cover us doing events put on by other local rec services / departments instead.
Hold on, I'm looking at it because I got a little lost here.
Mm-hmm.
So all the events run by agencies that were specifically putting on things prior to mid-March 2020 aren't coming back in that form. Okay, so what you should know is that some of them are coming back in the same form, but they're going to have to quickly switch by March of 2023. They've got to be fully integrated and fully inclusive. And so we've been arguing, why even let them come back the way they were? Like, build back better, like President Biden says, like if you're building back, don't build back the way you were before, because the way you were before wasn't great. So those programs are primarily adult programs, like adult day programs, work programs, sheltered workshops. We argue, why come back? Let's come back in a more inclusive setting with supported employment integrated competitive integrated employment or community-based programming during the day. But sadly, to our dismay, we believe that DDS will allow these very, very highly segregated programs to reopen in exactly the same segregated way that they were before, and they are going to continue to cause me lots of stress and grief. Before I saw that Molly had written a question.
Judy, I have it. Molly is asking whether the language around the trailer bill language with cost effectiveness language in it is still in the bill, which I think is very important. Thank you for asking, Molly.
Great question. So we don't know yet because the budget piece that I was talking about is just, and I don't know if you have a moment, Ed, not right this second, but to put the links to the budget stuff that I gave you earlier today in the chat.
Yep.
But you'll see that this is just about money. The trailer bill language is going to be negotiated over the next week. I have not seen it yet. I can tell you that we have spent a lot of time advocating with DDS to say that cost effectiveness language doesn't make any sense in the self-determination program. So let me explain what that was. I talked about a lot last week. So when the trailer bill language came out from the governor, it had littered all over it the term cost effectiveness. You should know that in the traditional system, people have to have cost effective services. Cost effective means that you have to take into account the individual's needs. You also have to take into account whether the service is appropriate for them. And then if you have, let's say, two service providers who provide equal kinds of supports and services that are appropriate, then you have to choose the more cost effective one, which basically means the cheaper one. So you should know that that it's fine in the self-determination program when developing the individual budget, because the budget is decided based on the traditional system, which already has to abide by that cost effectiveness provision in the Land Terminal. So honestly, it's just for us a duplication by having it in there on when developing the individual budget. And we're like, I don't know why you feel you need it. We don't think it's going to make any difference. Where we had really big problems is when the cost effectiveness term was applied to the spending plan, how people are spending their money. We do not want to see regional centers being required to say, oh, you want to purchase a karate class for your son? We want you to get 5 bids out there and choose the cheapest one. Or explain to us why you're not choosing the cheapest one. That completely is against the principles of self-determination, which gives us the authority over a specific amount of money. And as long as we stay within that budget, then we should have the authority over those plans.
Judy, thank you so much. I know that we need to switch to the hands up. I just have a really important question from Carl around also the Hcbs rules. Yes. And Carl is asking, how does the Hcbs rule apply to deaf people who want to be in ASL, American Sign Language environments, which I, as a mainstream deaf person myself, I think this is really important.
Wait, so this was related to the Hcbs rule?
Right, so if you wanted to be in an all deaf environment or an ASL supported environment.
Mm-hmm. So as I've been very specific, Carl, I'm looking right at you because you're right in the middle of my screen. It is about everybody in that environment being a regional center consumer. So if your son was in a program for deaf folks where there are deaf people with developmental disabilities, without developmental disabilities, all kinds of deaf people, you're fine. It's really about those individuals who are receiving regional center services, okay? All right, so yeah, that's totally fine. It's the same thing I can tell you. We were asking, like, what if they're in a program where everybody's female or everybody's Jewish, or, it's like, what? That's fine as long as they're not all people who are receiving regional center services that are paying for them to be there. Okay. All right, so let's go to, let me look at, John has been waiting very patiently. Go ahead, John. John's iPad. Just asked you to unmute. John, you there? All right, I'm going to go now to Christina, and then if John comes back, he can unmute himself. Go ahead, Christina.
Hi. Question. Yesterday, I was supporting a family friend who's a consumer at a regional center meeting with the service coordinator, and the service coordinator presented a traditional service provider that was now doing PCPs for consumers that want to transition over. And I had a couple questions regarding that. There was only one that was doing that. There wasn't anybody else that he could let us know about. And then also, he said that because hasn't been a decision made on whether or not people going into the program will get additional funding for independent facilitator, that this was the only option right now to have support for a PCP. Is that traditional service provider considered to be an independent facilitator if they provide and assist with the PCP? I think it's under service code 102 is what they're using, which is individual and family training. And if so, or if not, can then the consumer receive services from that? And then also I feel that it's blocking, it's a block for people that may want to use an independent facilitator. If regional centers are going to allow traditional service providers to help with PCPs, then shouldn't there be an RFP separate from the local advisory committee one that independent facilitators or people could apply to provide individual and family training under the service code 102?
Yeah, so it is an interesting and difficult question about whether traditional service providers can, or even independent facilitators for that matter, can provide person-centered planning services with this $2,500 coming in, because they're not called independent facilitators because you're not yet in the program. So that, remember, that term independent has a very specific definition in the self-determination law. You are not allowed to provide other services in the IPP because, let me explain why, in case you guys are not understanding why. It's because you don't want an independent facilitator who's basically saying, oh, I recommend you use this service provider for all of these services, which happens to be me. We're trying to have a big line between that broker of services and the service provider, right? So, unfortunately, because they're not called independent facilitators as they're going in, that same kind of divider doesn't exist. So theoretically, a traditional service provider could do the person-centered planning and move everybody right into their own services, which I have very significant problems with. It's, there's just way too many battles to fight right now. And it's, that's the kind of battle that if we see really big problems occurring in that area, that we will show DDS this problem. They will issue a directive saying these person-centered planners are considered the same as independent facilitators, and they must recommend, they cannot also provide services to that individual. Now, what is the difference between a vendored service provider and an independent facilitator? I think there's a dramatic difference. I know that some regional centers are vendoring certain agencies to provide this service. And many people are not trusting that agency because they feel like they are they're there working with the regional center, and that they'll somehow not advocate for them in a fierce way. I think it depends on the circumstance. I know a few of the agencies that have gotten contracts with regional centers to do this, and some of them are really fantastic agencies that would never do that. I don't, but I'm certain that there's some that could do that. So I couldn't really say. Here's the thing, everybody, is that as of July 1st, I'm 100% certain that you will be able to hire an independent facilitator to help you. There are tons of independent facilitators on this meeting right now. And if you don't have anybody, please just post something in the chat. Hey, I'm in San Gabriel. Hey, I'm in the Central Valley. I'm looking for a good independent facilitator. Anyone out there interested in contacting me? And then the independent facilitators can put their contact information in the chat and you can follow up with them. So I personally recommend that you hire one of these independent facilitators that have been working for the last couple of years, because there's a lot of really arcane and difficult things that are technical things you have to get through, and they've gotten experience in dealing with that. Does that answer your questions? Okay, good. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
I apologize. I lowered Hi's hand. I was trying to unmute them, but were next up.
Okay, can you unmute? Can you ask them to unmute again?
Absolutely, I'm doing it right now. Huh, there we go.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. This is my first time to join your meeting. Thank you for, having this kind of good, very resourceful, meeting. My son is such a picky eater. He only eats certain foods, and then, however, he's not underweight, but his goals after his high school, he wants to go to those programs like a professional wayfinders, go to some sort of like, they live together, but he's really afraid of actually going there because he thinks he won't make it because of his eating habit. So I really, this is for me, is really unmet goal through IPP. So is there any like way that I can approach the regional center to get funded any like program related to these issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to explain that unmet need and ask them what, I mean, this is not out of the blue. There's tons and tons of regional center clients who have issues with food, whether it's sensory issues or they need feeding therapy or whatever. Regional centers pay for this kind of stuff all the time. Sometimes it's a feeding therapist, sometimes it's an occupational therapist, sometimes it's a behavioral therapist. It kind of depends what the issue is, right? So if it's, or maybe it's a combination of folks. So it's obviously a really important thing for integration. Because if your son wants to go to a program that's an integrated program and he's afraid to go because of his picky eating habits, that's something that he needs to deal with. So so definitely discuss it. Ask the regional center, what have you done in the past for folks? Sometimes they may say this is going to trigger what's called generic resource rule, which means that if, let's say you need behavioral therapy, they may say you have to go to Medi-Cal or your insurance company. Honestly, I don't think a lot of behaviorists have a lot of experience in this. I personally think an OT may be a better way to go, but it just kind of depends on his issue. But an occupational therapist may also trigger generic resource. So you would have to go to your insurance company, you have to get declined from them to offer this kind of support, and then you have to go back to the regional center. It's certainly not fun. And so I would make the case as soon as possible because it may be a process. The one thing that I can say is this, is that to make the case for unmet need is going to be difficult, but I think it's very doable. But once you're in the self-determination program, I think you can easily spend the money in your spending plan on this. You just should absolutely not be calling it an occupational therapist or a behaviorist. You should be calling it community integration because this person is helping your son be able to go out to restaurants with friends, to be able to go to camps with friends, or to go to school with friends and be able to eat next to them. That person, is about community integration here. And so just don't call it, a lot of times you can get past the issues with your spending plan if you just call it the right thing and phrase it in the right way. I hope that helped.
Judy, I haven't heard back from John yet, but
Okay.
I have a bunch of questions in the chat that I can
Okay.
throw at you if you're ready.
Okay, absolutely. And I hate to do all the talking here. There's a bunch of amazing experts on this call. Cindy, who's been doing this for many years longer than I have. So if any of you want to respond to a question, you know what to do is just private message me, and then I'll unmute you. Okay, that's probably the easiest way to do it.
So Johnny asks, and I apologize, Johnny, I see that you've asked this question a couple of times and I missed it. Can the SDP help pay for home swimming pool retrofit or remodeling for my son's swimming/water therapy?
Theoretically, yes. So there is a part in the waiver that's called home modifications. And, primarily it's things like widening doorways to get wheelchairs in, or putting bars up in the shower, or even putting security systems in, or, if a person is deaf, to have, lights go on to tell them when the doorbell rings. There's lots of things that you can modify your home. I have not heard, I don't know if any of the independent facilitators are on here and have opinion about this. I've not heard specifically about modification of a pool, but I'm wondering if you were meaning like a Hoyer lift to get them into the pool. I would think that's a completely reasonable thing to spend money on. It's giving them access to a swimming pool that they wouldn't have access to if that Hoyer lift weren't there. Building a swimming pool in your backyard from scratch, I would say no. But modifying something so that a person with a disability is able to access it is, I think, a completely reasonable thing to ask for.
Thank you for that, Judy.
But remember, let me just say one more thing.
Yeah.
Everything here has to tie to an IPP goal. I said this last week, and I'm going to say it over and over again. So you have a person-centered plan, which is about your hopes and dreams. It's about your big goals in your life, sometimes very small goals, sometimes very big goals. For my son and his first person-centered plan, one of the things that came out of it is wanted to spend more time with his grandfather. That cost $0. That was a goal in his PCP, but it was not a goal in his IPP. That would be a weird goal in his IPP. So the goals that you're looking for in your IPP are informed by your PCP. So your person-centered plan, you think about the person in their whole, everything in their life, their hopes, their dreams, and then you think about from that, what does that mean for the government? Remember, government's not going to give you a trip to Tahiti. The government's not going to give you, everything in the universe that you want in your life. What traditionally government pays for is community integration, employment, behavior, health, safety, all those kinds of things that are not always things that are always important to us, but they're important for us. And so you need to then develop goals in your IPP that are related to those kinds of traditional goals that exist. I said this last week, and it seemed to resonate with a bunch of people, that I see, if anybody knows about the different models of disability, there's the medical model of disability and the social model of disability. I'm a professor at UCLA, so I'm kind of teaching you now. The medical model of disability still exists in most places. It's long-standing, where it's based on deficits. It's based on things you cannot do or things you do badly. So you're at your IEP in school, you have to write down, cannot throw a ball, cannot speak, cannot attend to class, cannot, walk, whatever it is, all the things you cannot do. That's how you get services. It's the same thing with your IPP. The way you get services is showing all the problems you have in your life. You cannot live on your own. You cannot work on your own. All the kinds of things you cannot do. And the IPP is about fixing those things you cannot do. That's called the medical model. That's like your IPP. The social model of disability is about acceptance and accommodation, and figuring out what your strengths are. So at your person-centered plan, you should not be talking about all the things you cannot do. You should be talking about all the cool things you are in your life. One of the things we did at my son's person-centered plans, he said 3 of them now, is people go around the room and ask what it is that they love about Josh, what it is that surprises them about Josh. And all these really cool things come out. And that is the start of your person-centered plan. I highly recommend you ask, if you're looking to hire an independent facilitator, ask them, what's the first question you usually ask when you're conducting a person-centered plan? And it better be strength-based. It better be saying something like, How great is this person? What do you enjoy in your life? What do you love to do, as opposed to what are all the problems? What do you need services for? That's the IPP. That's not the person-centered plan. They are not the same thing, even though the person-centered plan informs the IPP. So when you're writing your IPP goals, you have to make sure that if you're going to want to retrofit of your pool, that you better have a freaking IPP goal about what that is. That you need exercise, that hydrotherapy is critically important for strength of the legs, that maybe being in a swimming pool helps calm you. So one of the things is, one of the goals is to remain calm when you have anxiety or whatever it is. Make sure your goals are very purposefully written so that if you have something in your spending plan, it better meet one of those IPP goals. So just a quick aside, I've been hearing people having a lot of problems getting Disneyland passes paid for. And that's because it looks like you just want to get the government to pay for your Disneyland pass. The government should not be paying for Disneyland passes. The government should be paying for community integration, for social skills, for exercise, all of which can be done if you go to Disneyland. So you have to build your case. You really have to build your case. If you want to get a new iPad, your iPad shouldn't be about playing video games, because the government shouldn't be helping you play video games. But if your iPad is because you cannot speak to communicate, and you are going to learn to type to communicate on that iPad, so now it's become a communication device. So you're not asking for an iPad, you're asking for a communication device. But of course, if you speak to communicate and you're not using the iPad in that way, do not put an iPad in your spending plan. This is the third week in a row I've said this. If the self-determination program is going to last forever, we have to take all of the 5 principles responsibility. It's not just about the freedom that we want and the authority we want, all those things that I've been talking about. It's also about that responsibility piece, is that we are responsible to take government funds and to use it in the responsible ways. So this is not a game show. This is not about spending as much money as we can and flooding that budget. It is about equity, though. If you are traditionally underserved, with so many people of color are, this is a way that you can get the services that you need to be able to create a more equitable program. You should know that DDS, the reason why they put those cost effectiveness lines in there, because they're very worried about the long-term ability of this program to be able to remain in existence. Because a lot of the first year that people are going in the last year, people's budgets have been higher than they were in the traditional system. Now, I can give you a whole bunch of reasons of why that is. It's because 1/3 of the people who've gone in are Latino, and Latinos receive half the amount of services in the traditional system than whites. So they're getting a bump in their services. We also know that a lot of the people who went into the program initially were not being served well in the traditional system, that their needs were not being met. And so, of course, they are now doing all kinds of wonderful and cool things in the self-determination program they weren't able to do in the traditional system. So I believe there's a whole range of reasons for why those budgets have gone up. And I think that we're going to continue to explore that as time goes on. So anyway, I just want to make sure you all are looking for the responsibility piece.
Thank you, Judy. I have a question from Ruby, who it appears has left, but I'm hoping she either sees this or watches the recording later. And also, I think she's probably not the only one who has this question. What do we do if we have already taken the orientation for the self-determination program at our regional center, and they're saying they don't have proof that we took it? Who should have records of people who have already taken the orientation before the pandemic?
Oh my God, there's always something new that I get to hear at these calls. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Okay, so I can't, honestly, this is the first time I've heard this, so I'm hoping this is not true with a lot of people. This is one of those things that I would write DDS about. because that's absurd. But let me talk to you guys a little bit about the orientation, because this relates to that. The orientations right now have been traditionally done by your own regional center, and you're required to go to your regional center. Now, if you look at the law, which I spend a lot of my time looking at the law, and in the law, this is what it says about orientations, that participants are required to go through an orientation. It doesn't say they're required to go through an orientation at their own regional center. It's saying that participants are required, but then it also says, it doesn't say that the orientation has to be X amount of hours long, or even that it has to be the orientation that was created by DDS, just as they have to go through an orientation. Then when you look at the responsibilities of regional centers, it says regional centers have to offer orientations. But nowhere does it say that every person has to go to their own regional center's orientation. In addition, this is the last piece of that $10.2 million for the self-determination money out of the state budget. So remember, we're getting $7.8 million for those regional center staff. We're getting $2.5 million for the person-centered planning for incoming participants. And then the final $600,000 goes to two organizations. Well, there will be two contracts provided. One to develop a statewide orientation that people will be able to take online, or maybe there might be some in person after COVID. Obviously, nothing's happening in person right now. Or they are at the other end, they're setting up training for regional center staff. Every regional center service coordinator is going to be required to go through a training program on the self-determination program. So they're going to have what's called an RFP, or a request for proposals for an organization, for one or two organizations to create these trainings. So my feeling is that if they're already talking about creating a statewide training, then dang, DVU is going to start doing some orientations, because there's no way that everybody's going to be able to go to their regional center orientation. And by the way, I helped to write the DDS orientation. They made it worse and much longer, but I did write the original version of it. And so, so I actually sent an email just today to DDS to say, can I start hosting orientations for all these folks? We will provide them with a certificate that shows that they went through orientation, and then they can enter the self-determination program with the regional center. Shockingly, DDS did not get back to me, because they never do, very quickly. But I'm hoping to get an answer for you, and as soon as we do, we will schedule orientations.
And Judy, I just want to advise you that people are saying from both Westside and S. Clark in the chat that Westside and S. Clark have both said they don't have any orientation scheduled yet. S. Clark has said they will not be counting any other orientations, and they don't have records. That means if we want to make the transition, Ruby says, we have to wait until June 28th in S. Clark, because they don't have to prove that they don't have any proof that we attended before the pandemic. So just wanted to let you know what's
Ruby,
going
let's talk about it, Ruby. You owe me a phone call anyway, Ruby.
Sorry, Judy.
Yeah,
go ahead.
So I think this is going to be resolved very soon once the budget's passed in the next couple of weeks, because of this issue of creating the statewide training that, you know, I think by the way, these SDP Connects are orientations. Every week we do an orientation, basically. We don't start from the very beginning. If you go back to last August and start going through our 30 SDP Connects, you will get 38 more, because some of our SDP Connects were 2 hours long. You're going to have like 100 hours of an orientation. So at your leisure. So I believe that it's you know, regional centers often make up their own rules when in the absence of DDS providing rules. So one other question that's come up is the requirement to go to an informational meeting on top of an orientation. That is not true. So you should know that an informational meeting was what was required of people who wanted to go into the phase-in period, who wanted to get on the wait list. So how do we know you want to get on the wait list? Come to the short, hour and a half informational meeting. Then you can give us at the end your name and the consumer's name and blah, 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 and we'll put you on the email list. Anyone, by the way, could host those informational meetings. I hosted tons of those meetings and put lots of you who are on this call on the waiting list or into the phase-in period. So that is no longer required. If you look at the statute, there's nothing requiring an informational meeting, but you will be required to go through an orientation. All right. So if you're hearing that, please let me know, and I will try to get DDS to wait. This is, by the way, why we need a freaking ombuds person, because the ombuds person would be hearing these complaints, saying something right away to DDS to say, you need to get out information on this.
Thank you, Judy. Still haven't heard from John. I'm checking in with him periodically, but I still have tons of questions in the chat. The next is from Maria. Regarding the $2,500 for independent facilitator and person-centered planning services, this is a one-time payment to your IF or your person-centered planner. What happens the next time or the following year or month on the fees of the IF?
Great question. So you have to put something in your budget to do that. So the reason why you get that money at the beginning is because you don't have a budget yet. So how is it, you can't possibly you're required to do person-centered planning to get into the program. And yet you don't have a budget to do it. So this gives you that money. Once you're in the program, when you're creating, you have to have what's called a spending plan. And that spending plan should absolutely have funding for an independent facilitator to do your person-centered plan if you feel you're going to need a big person-centered plan for year 2. Let me tell you that we didn't put in money for an independent facilitator to do a person-centered plan for year 2 for my son. And the reason why is because he went into the program during COVID. We knew that there would be very little of what was in the spending plan that he could do. And so therefore we wanted to be able to use that money for other things. But this year we are, for next year, so we are basically using a very similar person-centered plan to last year. We did do a planning meeting with my son. It was just a few of us talking through what he's interested in. But for the coming year, for next year, we'll probably do a whole big person-centered plan because one of his goals is to move out in the next couple of years. And we're going to have to really think hard about what the necessary things are to help him move out.
Thank you very much, Judy. And this is just something that I've seen from a couple of different folks in the chat. I think you can answer it very quickly. Would you recommend that a family member be the IF for someone who is in the self-determination program? Or would you recommend that they get a professional independent facilitator if that's something they're considering?
Okay, I don't recommend a professional independent facilitator or any kind of, Talene, did you want to say something about that? Okay, I'm muting you. I mean, I don't recommend anybody get any kind of independent facilitator. What I do recommend, I don't require anything. What I do recommend is that you get a facilitator you're comfortable with and who knows you well. I certainly believe that as you're entering the program for the first time, no parent should ever be the independent facilitator of their child, and that you should absolutely hire a person to come in. It can be a person like your special ed teacher that you had and has known you for years, or it could be one of these folks who've been working in it and you meet them and you connect with them and that's a good person for you. I never recommend the first time you're going in as a parent say, I've had parents directly say to me, I know my child so well, we don't even need to do a person-centered plan. I just wrote their whole thing. Like, absolutely not. I train independent facilitators. I've written 2 books on the self-determination program. I still hired an independent facilitator for my son because I was too close to him. I needed someone from the outside to help move us through the process. And so I really strongly recommend you doing that. By the way, you can also ask your service coordinator to be your independent facilitator or your person-centered planner. They will not get paid. You do not have to spend any money for your budget. And there are many people who have great relationships with their service coordinator, have known them for many, many years, who I can tell you that our former service coordinator was so spectacular. She would have been my absolute first choice to do that. Unfortunately, they promoted her, which is very irritating, but they promoted her at our regional center, and she's no longer a service coordinator. So we have a new service coordinator who doesn't know us, who came into the plant program, who became our service coordinator during COVID. So we've actually never even met him in person. So that's not like a person that you'd want to be leading a person-centered plan. In some cases, you wouldn't even want them at your person-centered planning meeting because you don't have a good relationship or you don't even know them. So, you just have to do what's right for you.
So that's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to reiterate what you just said, is that even me, I'm an independent facilitator. I have a 17-year-old that I'm writing a person-centered plan for. Well, I'm not doing it. I'm hiring someone to do it. Somebody else needs to do it. I need to be mom at that point. I need to be able to voice my opinion as a mom, or not voice my opinion for that matter, and let him have his own voice. So I think it's important for people to realize that the process is very cumbersome, and to be playing both roles is very difficult. So I definitely encourage people to use an IF. One other idea, if you have someone that you want to be the ongoing independent facilitator for your child, bring them on board in that process as you go through the transition, and you hire a professional independent facilitator to do the transition for you. And then that other IF can actually be the independent facilitator for you throughout the year, but they've got, at least that you have somebody else that you're kind of relying on, but isn't doing the day-to-day work in terms of looking for resources and making phone calls and all of that. So you can split the job into two different parts if you wanted to. We have a client that we did that for, and it's working out beautifully.
Yeah, and just to build on that, Celine, you can have as many independent facilitators as you want. You can have one who does your person-centered planning, one who might be your advocate, one who might be helping you manage your staff. You can have different kinds of people be your independent facilitator. Okay, just remember they cannot provide services other than that independent facilitation. Okay. Are there other questions in the chat? Because I don't see any hands up.
Yes, there are. Absolutely. I have as many questions as you can answer. So
yeah, we have 14 more minutes, folks.
Heck yes. So the next one is from Janelle. Should we be asking people to call the governor's office about the budget? Great question, Janelle. I believe Molly has also asked this as well.
Yeah, so we're figuring that out. We promise we will send an action alert out to you all. Make sure you're on our mailing list as soon as we figure that out. What we don't want to do is force everybody to bombard the governor with a million phone calls unnecessarily, because it just kind of irritates these elected officials when you do that. When they say, I'm on your side, stop. But what I have a feeling we're going to know by Friday if we need to alert you. So the calls would be around ensuring that social rec is restored and ensuring that we have the right trailable language on the self-determination program. Those would be the two asks you would have. And so let's see where we are. I'm hearing really good things on all of it. So we're lucky. We're in a year where there's just a ton of money. So when you ask for things, you kind of get it. But you should know that there's additional money. This is not even all the money that we're getting. The federal government is giving many billions more dollars as part of something called the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. And that money could bring another $600 million to the DD system for one-time use. So that money is going to be decided by Monday of how that money is going to be spent. So there's just a lot of money that everybody's asking for and trying to get their hand in that pie. And DVU certainly has our ideas of how that money should be spent, which is very different than everybody else. DVU always sets its path in a very different way than other groups. And well, I'll just tell you in a minute, because I think you'll all be very surprised. So Disability Voices United has been gravely concerned for many years about the lack of transparency and accountability in the DV system. And I don't mean just at regional centers, I mean with service providers too. For many of you in the traditional system, you may not know that your service providers are writing reports about you. You have a right to see what's in that report at all times, but maybe your service coordinator is not showing you that report. You also have a right to look at how the billing is going to confirm that the service provider is actually billing in the actual days that they're showing up. That kind of transparency and accountability barely exists. You also may not even get copies of your IPP. You may not see, what maybe a psychiatrist or a doctor has recommended that goes into your IPP. These are really significant problems, and I believe are keeping people from having good outcomes. So one of the reasons why none of this exists is because the computer system that the regional centers used was built in 1983 and still uses the DOS operating system. You have to be as old as me to remember the DOS operating system. That was the original operating system, the original like IBM personal computers that were like gigantic. The myth goes, I don't know if this is true, but there's a myth that whenever something needs updating in the computer systems for the regional centers and DDS, that it requires this elderly man in a retirement home in Florida to actually help write the language. It's probably myth, but it's a great story. So then the other part is that the billing system at the regional centers are horrible. Service providers are not getting paid in a timely way. It is just basically a total mess. And all 21 regional centers are doing things in 21 different ways. So our recommendation is, because it's one-time money, is to spend, and it will cost more than $600 million, an entirely new information technology system for the DD system that is forward-facing. So for those of you who have Kaiser or belong to a hospital, UCLA Hospital or whatever, you may have an online app or platform or a portal where you can go in and see your test results on demand. You can see the records that the doctors have written about you. Everything is transparent now because of the Affordable Care Act. They're required by law to show you all your records. We want that kind of transparency in the regional center system. We think it will produce more accountability over service providers. We want you also to be able to find out if there's ever been a special incident report written about a service provider that you've had. A special incident report happens when the person who's being served in that setting has some sort of incident, whether there's an act of aggression, whether there's an abuse claim, whether there's whether somebody died under their watch. We want to know that before we put our child or we ourselves go into that program, or we put somebody into that program, right? So we want all of this information to be available on an app that we can lift up our phone and say, oh, I'm looking for a new service provider. I'm going to see if there's any special incident reports or any complaints against that provider. So this is, I can tell you, we're the only ones calling for this. Other groups are saying that we should be asking for more money for service providers' rates. That's what a lot of the service providers are calling for. There's also some various monies on affordable housing and other kinds of things that people are calling for. We're saying the best way to improve the DD system in California is by changing the way that we get our information and by making things much more accessible to us.
Thank you, Judy. I have a question from Jenny. I apologize. Jenny, you asked this question earlier, and I wasn't sure whether you just wanted me to address it or whether you wanted it addressed publicly. Thank you for the clarification. Jenny asks, can the SDP or traditional service funding be used to fund full staff training of public camp and rec programs?
Ooh, that's such a good idea. Why not? Why not? Of course, remember, but don't call it staff training. Well, actually, staff training is actually one of them. There's parent training and staff training. So actually, you don't even have to call. Yes, you can call it that. Absolutely. It's right there. I'm sure it's in the waiver. I'm sure, yes, you can do that. What a phenomenal idea.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you for that.
It's probably under community integration supports or community living supports or something along those lines. Well, there's family training. We'll figure it out. But yes, it is a great idea.
Okay, thank you, Judy. I have a question from Steve. Is the PCP for the parent and or regional center client? My person cannot sit through an orientation.
Oh, yeah. Don't worry about that. Yeah. It is whoever, it's either the participant or their designated representative will go to the orientation, of course. Yeah, my son would never sit through an orientation. So absolutely.
But the person-centered plan is required, correct, Judy?
The person-centered plan is required. That's different than the orientation, and the person must be at their entire person-centered plan.
Right.
So guess what? If that person can only handle 30 minutes of a PCP, then that's their PCP. Or if they need 10-minute increments, or if their PCP needs to be done musically, or doing karaoke, or while watching a movie, or in the swimming pool, whatever it is that works for that individual is how their person-centered plan should be. Sally Burton Hoyle calls a person-centered plan, she's the greatest in the country, and she calls it a party with a purpose. So you want it to be a fiesta, a celebration of that individual. You want to have it at the time and place that makes them most comfortable, with the food that they want to serve, with only the people around them that they trust. And so, that's how come you may hear a regional center say the IPP is the same thing as the PCP. That is not true. Because in IPP, you have to go over the medication, you have to go over their behaviors. My son would never want to sit through a meeting where they're talking about the medications and behaviors. So it's really important that you understand what the feeling is of a PCP. So Tina's staying as her hand up. I'm going to have that be the last question. Okay, Tina, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, where can we purchase the March 2021 edition of Think Outside the Box booklet, which is the latest?
Absolutely. So if you registered for our conference, you will be getting one for free, as long as your regional center has paid for you to go, or your FMS, if you're in the self-determination program, has paid for you. I know that about 100 of them went out the door today to the post office.
So I have mine, but some of my friends who
Ah.
are not in the program yet, they want to buy a copy too. So I'm asking for
Absolutely.
them.
So you could, if you could put in the chat how you buy the book. We have a new edition. It's called the March 2021 edition. And somebody was just asking where you can find the list of services. If you look in the table of contents, you will see that it says services for people, services in the self-determination program, and you will see program service definitions by the federal government starting on page 130.
And to clarify, there's some questions in the chat regarding some language on the website. The website says that we last updated the booklet in 2019. No, I just uploaded that content onto the website in 2019. I will update that page as soon as possible. If you order from the online bookstore, you will get the most recent edition of the Think Outside the Box text. So I just want to be very clear about that.
Yeah, sorry. There's so many things that are constantly needing to be updated on our website. And luckily you talked to the right person, because Ed is the one that does that. So we will make that updated. So guys, I just want to let you know that we need to end in 2 minutes. Carl, did you have a very, very quick question that I can answer in a minute?
Yeah, I hope you don't mind. I'd like to post the link in chat for anyone who isn't aware about the case we have where DDS is attempting to become my son's conservator. I know you talked about everything in the regional center system should be open. And that's why I established my blog. But it turned out they didn't like my blog. And it turns out they retaliate.
Yeah.
And now they're attempting to become my son's conservator, and that will shut me up. So anyway,
Carl,
doesn't know what's going
I have read your entire blog, and it is very upsetting. And I've actually asked one of our staff at DVU to reach out to you, Suzanne Bennett Francisco. So she's an expert on supporting decision-making and exiting conservatorships. So
Great. Thanks for letting me mention that.
absolutely. So thank you all for joining us today. What an amazingly large group. You guys are incredible. We will be back next week. We will have more information on the budget. We'll be in the tail end of the budget next week. If there is a need for any of you to be making calls to the governor, you will be getting an action alert. I promise you. And I really urge you to just pick up the phone or send an email. It makes a difference. The governor hears from everybody and it makes a difference. So please, please, if you get this action alert, do make that call. So have a great week, everybody. And we will talk to you all very soon.